The philosophy is that if you want to create change, you have to build power. And if you want to build community power, to build community power, there's three sources of community power. There are organized people, there's an organized message, and there's organized resources.
Bienvenidos a Moneda Moves, mi gente, where we talk money and cultura. Today we're joined by Berto Aguayo, an intellectual property attorney at K&L Gates and founder of Increase the Peace Chicago, a nonprofit that empowers youth with the tools and mentorship to become community leaders. Now, Berto and I have a personal relationship because we both attended the Chicago Latino Caucus Foundation Leadership Academy just last year. That's where I learned about his vision to learn how power works, in this case in the law, in the space of law, to then help uplift his community. And for him, this is personal. Drawing from his transformation from a former gang member to community advocate, Berto has dedicated his career to building safer, more inclusive neighborhoods all throughout the city and has supported more than 700 young people through jobs and civic leadership training. He also co-founded the annual Black and Brown Unity Car Parade, born during the George Floyd uprisings as a public celebration of racial healing and solidarity. Berto now holds a law degree with honors from Northwestern, a bachelor's in political science and economics from Dominican University. He's also alum of University of Chicago's Civic Leadership Academy. His work has earned him the 2023 Red Cross Social Justice Hero Award and recognition from Hispanic Executives 30 Under 30 in 2024. Now, here's why this conversation matters today. Latinos are not only an economic engine, you've heard the numbers, we're also a political force. The second largest voting bloc in the country, decisive in local and national elections and growing in representation. But too often, the wealth we help generate and the policies that shape our lives, they just don't reflect our power. That gap really matters because narrative is power. And today with Berto, we're exploring what's at stake when we don't control our own story and how law, language, and leadership can change that. You're listening to Moneda Moves, a podcast where we cover the intersection of money and cultura. I'm your host, Leon Alfaro, an award-winning producer, Forbes contributor, and founder of Moneda Moves. Now, if you're new to Moneda Moves, welcome. If you're coming back, Moneda Moves is evolving. And now we're not just talking about assets and cash, we're talking about capital in all of its forms. Financial, social, political, and cultural. Because Latinos are powerful, resilient, and at the forefront of building the systems our communities need to thrive today. From mutual aid networks to nonprofits, from entrepreneurs to innovators, we're rewriting what growth looks like. And let's be clear, a podcast like this has never been more important. Our stories, our strategies, and our poder deserve the mic. Here we'll highlight Latinos shaping business, redefining our relationship with money, and fueling the American economy. We'll increase transparency around dinero, celebrate achievements, and share the playbooks that move our comunidades forward, not just in the US, but at a global scale. Join me weekly this season as we feature new entrepreneurs and innovators, and those building alongside us. No te lo quieras perder. Thank you so much for joining us, Berto.
No, thank you for having me.
Now, you've got quite the journey, and I want folks to hear it firsthand from you. Going from back of the yards, growing up in community challenges, to then saying, hey, I want to address some of those challenges and increasing and founding Increase the Peace, and now becoming an attorney as well. And I met you when you were in the middle of alchemizing this, so it is so cool to see you, do what you say you're going to do, see you in the position of power, and then just earlier this week, even holding a reception with, I think it was Latino Victory Fund and JB Pritzker. So talk to me a little bit about the journey and the tipping point that led it to this series of events, because as we know, it's never linear, but talk to us through it, through where you started and that changing point for you.
Yeah, sure thing. So I guess it all started in Mexico. So as you can see, I'm Mexican American. My mom was raised in Zacatecas, a town called Jalpa, and it's funny because I like to say I was made in Mexico because my parents got married, and then they said, hey, you know what, while my mom was pregnant, they decided to move to Chicago. So they came here when my mom was 16 years old and pregnant with me, and they moved into the back of the yards neighborhood in the south side of Chicago, um, predominantly black and brown community, working class, and around when I was 10 years old, my parents split up. You know, my there was a lot of domestic abuse in the house, and my mom built up the courage to say, "Hey, I don't want to deal with this anymore," and she decided to go on her own. And I remember thinking, "Oh man, this is awesome! I'm gonna come home to my mom not crying, less violence in the household." And I'm the only guy in the family. I have two younger sisters, so for me, I thought it was gonna be just a sea change in my house and my home. But growing up and living with a single mom, that also led to its own challenges. Right, my dad completely left the picture, and my aunt moved in with us because she was also fleeing domestic violence from California. She moved into Chicago with us. My grandma was also a single mom, moved in with us too. So now you have in back of the yards. I'm 10 years old, and I'm living in a 500 square foot apartment with my single mom, my single aunt, my single grandma, my two younger sisters, and my three younger cousins, all in the same place.
The packed
So
house.
packed house. And my mom was and is a hairdresser. Everybody knows her. That's Everybody gets their hair done with her. And my grandma worked at the local McDonald's, and my aunt worked at a local tortilla factory. And so, these three powerful women raised me, and they did everything they could to make sure that we had food on the table, roof over our head. But, those choices that they had to make between just paying the rent, paying for food, and taking care of us meant that I was just often home alone. I was raised in the streets. I was, at the park playing with my friends. Soccer was my thing. But quickly, in a community like Back of the Yards, um, you realize how little there is to do, right? You can't be in a more formal soccer team because that implies registration fees, paying the referee, and my mom just couldn't afford it. And I just didn't have any opportunities, any job really, to do in the community. And when I was 13 years old, I joined the gang. And it just happened because that's where my friends were at, but also because I remember at 13 years old, that was really the only thing to do in my small community in Back of the Yards. And I remember part of the tipping point for me, there's a couple tipping points here. The first one is I remember I was 13 years old, and it's 2 weeks after my eighth grade graduation, and I lose my first friend to gun violence. And we're at his funeral, and I remember his name was Juan Hernandez, and I remember thinking, man, and mind you, I'm 13 years old. My world is limited to my block, right? Like, and that in that moment, I remember thinking, man, I want to give my all for my community the way he did. And subsequently, I joined the gang. And obviously, that was the wrong mindset, right? That was the wrong way
And
of
this
looking
was
at
you
the world.
at 13. You
This is
said,
me at 13.
"Hey, this is what mobility in my neighborhood looks like. This is what standing up for my community looks like
Yeah.
in my
And mind
neighborhood."
you, at that point, I'm the only guy in the household. And for me, like, I was trying to learn how to become a man, and the only role models that I had were the guys on the block. And for me, like, being a man was partly self-sufficiency, right? Like, how can I provide for myself and protect those I love and be part of something bigger than myself? And as odd as it sounds, for many young people and low-income communities, those are the only options, right? And that was the only option for me. Um, Luckily for me, though, I had a badass mom who didn't give up, and who was like, "Nah, mijo, you ain't going down that route. No, that's not. That's not gonna ride around here." And I remember, um, I was around 14, 15, and my mom was just desperate to find a job for me. Find something for me to do. And just some stats here in Back of the Yards. At the time, it was around 50,000 people live in that community, And I remember there was a youth unemployment report that said that young people between the ages of 16 to 24, there were about 4,500 young people in my community that didn't have a job,
Mm.
and weren't going to school, right? And so you look at the top 10 neighborhoods with the highest homicide rates in Chicago, they're also likely the top 10 neighborhoods with the least amount of opportunities, with the highest levels of youth unemployment.
Sorry, just for folks that aren't familiar with Chicago, like why is that? Why is that there is such high unemployment for youth? Like what are the like structural powers that be that like cause that?
So I think one of the problems is just segregation, right? Like we're a very segregated city, and a lot of the opportunities are downtown, and right, that's like the economic hub of the city. And mind you, I'm going to share a story about how there's more opportunity in our communities too. But generally, I, to access those opportunities, you got to travel, and
Right.
just for context, someone like me that lived in back of the yards in the South Side, I had never been downtown, right, as a teenager, right? Like
Yeah.
to go downtown was like to go to another city. Um, but I remember, despite those challenges and despite those like structural limitations, there are a lot of, grocery stores, tienditas, um, small mom and pop shops, and that's actually it's funny that we're talking about economic power and changing the narrative because that's what changed my life. It was a partnership between my mom, a hairdresser, and a grocery store owner across the street. The grocery store was called La Raza. It's still called
Oh,
La Raza. It's on
nice.
47th and Marshfield, yeah. And
Love
she
it.
goes across she goes across the street, and two brothers own that store, Don Pancho and Don Chuy. Don Pancho, rest in peace, he passed away a few years ago. Um, but my mom goes to the grocery store, and she tells Don Pancho and Don Chuy and says, "Hey, my son, he's going down the wrong path. Is there any way you guys can hire him? He desperately needs a job." And Don Pancho and Don Chu were like, "Man, my mom's name is Rosie." And they say, "Rosie, I'm sorry, but we barely got enough to cover the employees that are here." And my mom, she told me the story years later during Christmas, and I remember it made me tear up. But she told me that she told Don Pancho and Don Chuy, "Hey, it's okay. I'll pay half his wage. I'll give you guys whatever you give him, I'll match it. And just have him do something here, have him clean the dishes, do something so that he feels like he has something to do."
Wow.
And one day after school, I show up to my mom's hair salon, and she says, "Hey, I heard Don Pancho and Don Chuy are hiring. You want to go check if you want to work there?" And sure enough, I go. And, sophomore, junior year of high school, I found myself at the grocery store, cleaning dishes, doing inventory. And I always remember thinking, like, I would get paid, like, maybe like $50, you know, for like a lot of time. $50 for a whole week of, doing stuff. I was like, damn, like, why am I getting paid so little? But for me, it was like, it's money. But I just thought, dang, this is not even minimum wage, man. Like, what's going on here?
That's where you started doing your research.
Yeah, I was like, I know it ain't right, but I was like, hey, this is what I got. It's all good. Um, and that kept me busy, right? So it was like this partnership between, a hairdresser and a grocery store owner that helped change my life, right? That helped keep me busy. And then later, so that was sophomore year, junior year of high school, and then junior year of high school, my high school principal tell another opportunity, another tipping point. Um, she tells me, "Hey, I want to connect you with this job opportunity." I was serving an in-school suspension for a gang fight, and she walks in. She's like, "Hey, I don't want you to get killed this summer. Um, Here's a job application to this organization called MICVA Challenge, and
Mm.
I want you to apply. And if you need a recommendation letter, I'll write you one." And so here I am, this 16, 17-year-old kid applying for this job. And I don't know what MICVA Challenge is, but for context for people listening, MICVA Challenge is an organization that connects young people to politics and to civic opportunities, paid civic opportunities, right? But I had no idea that that was the case. I had no idea that this organization places young people in senators' offices, in aldermen's offices, and pays them to work there for a summer. I thought, like, I'm gonna do some labor. Maybe it's another grocery store owner type deal, like the one I had. So
Mm-hmm.
I, re- I remember going downtown for the interview, and again, it was one of the first times I ever went downtown. I go downtown for the interview. I show up in my beige shorts. I had a T-shirt that had a Scarface, like it had Scarface on it. Like there's
No
this,
way.
this kid from the hood.
Whose
And
office were you at?
I remember it was on 200 like South Michigan, at Mick Challenger's
Nice.
office for the interview. And I show up and it's a bunch of, young urban professionals, a bunch of yuppies, right? Like
Yep,
dressed like
yep.
me, dressed like me. And I'm like, dang, I just felt so out of place. Did the interview and I thought, yeah, they're not gonna hire me. And they emailed me and told me, hey, congrats, you got the job. But being a 16, 17-year-old kid that doesn't check email, I responded like a month late and I said, hey, is this job still available? And they were going to place me in Pilsen with Alderman Danny Solis, who,
Oh,
had a
wow.
corruption
Yeah.
scandal and everything. But,
Yeah.
as
Dang.
fortune would have it, because I was this kid from the hood that didn't check email, they said, hey, that job is no longer available. The only one that we have is one working for Alderwoman Michelle Smith in the 43rd Ward in the north side of the city in Lincoln Park.
They were gonna send you to a whole new city.
Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
basically the complete opposite of back of the yards, right? And again, for folks that are listening, the south side is like working class neighborhoods, back of the yards. The north side, especially Lincoln Park, is an affluent community. That that's what Lincoln Park.
It's one of the neighborhoods that's allotted to have the least crime rate. So quite the 180
Exactly.
from the
Hmm.
neighborhood that you grew up in. And it just speaks to how segregated Chicago is. And just giving some context to those that are still wondering. And if you're listening and you're curious, I encourage you to go do some research because Chicago was structurally segregated time and time over, but especially federally by the government through housing, and making sure and ensuring that certain neighborhoods stayed white and affluent, and keeping people of color and lower income folks out of those neighborhoods. So hence how we've ended up with the neighborhoods in Chicago as we have. So it sounds like you had quite a few. The tipping points for you, it sounds like, rather than driven by although there were a lot of negative consequences, it sounds like more of like the positive affirmations were tipping
Hmm.
points that you've
Yeah,
identified in your life, and realizing that there's more opportunity than what your immediate neighborhood was presenting you with.
exactly. Yeah, and I share kind of those people because and those opportunities because I think it talks about the larger Latino story, right? Like we are byproducts of community, right? We're byproducts of people coming together, creating these opportunities. You think about Latinos just generally, right? The fifth largest economy in the world. We were our own country.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're job creators. We are opportunity generators. And that's what changed my life. A partnership between a hairdresser, my mom, and a grocery store owner across the street, working at a tiendita. Like that changed my life. And then my high school principal. And, and it's also partly why I cringe whenever someone says, oh, I'm self made. Like, no
Yeah.
one is self made, right? That's a myth. Like, that doesn't exist. Everyone's community made. We're made of not just our current community, but our ancestral community, those that paved the way before us. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that was certainly true for me.
Yeah, yeah. And I love how your story illustrates that. And that is the story, by the way, of Chicago, especially being here in Chicago, being able to have worked with folks who have been here their entire lives, because I'm from Chicago, but I also have been outside of Chicago for some time. Like, that is something that Chicago will teach you. It'll teach you the power of capital that lies in community. And that's something that tends to be overlooked in the bigger systems that be, but Chicago's really, really good at it. Now, I want to chat with you a little bit more about where your profession stands today in law, the intersection of law and business. We're seeing a lot of Latino and Black owned businesses under pressure in the current administration, and where wealth seems palpably at threat because of this, because there are lawsuits, policy rollbacks, funding cuts that impact directly our communities, right? Like grants that were available. There are real lawsuits because of executive orders targeting some of our businesses based on what they stand for. And from your vantage point, both as a lawyer and an organizer, how do you see law functioning then as a weapon, but also as a tool for people to free themselves and to continue to build that power?
Yeah, so a couple different ways that I can answer that question. And I think the first one goes to um, the way you started this conversation, right? About how do we change narrative, build power. Um, and my background is in community organizing, right? After growing up, I found it increased the peace. That story that I just shared about those opportunities, I wanted to replicate that in my own community. And that's why I found it increased the peace because I'm like, man, young people shouldn't have to go to Lincoln Park, or have to go downtown to get these opportunities. They should be able to get paid opportunities to do cool things in their community because that's going to drive down violence, right? And that was the kind of the impetus of doing this, and that's why I found it increased the peace in 2016. And so, in at Increase the Peace, we teach young people how to be community organizers. And in the community organizing tradition, you get a formal training to become a community organizer. And this is the same training that, Cesar Chavez got back in the day. This is the same training that President Obama got when he was a community organizer. And mind you, and here's kind of a cool plug for Back of the Yards, that kind of community organizing philosophy, the birthplace of it is Back of the Yards, right? It was folks in Back of the Yards organizing and creating kind of this kind of philosophy of how to build social change by building community power, right?
I did not know that. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I guess that makes sense because when you think about Back of the Yards, that area has always been shaped by immigrants, very
hmm
heavily manufacturing, today very heavily powered by Latino small
hmm
businesses. So is that why it bred such a community organizing breed of
So
people?
part of the story here is that Back of the Yards is called Back of the Yards because it's in back of the old stockyards in Chicago, right? And the stockyards back in the day used to produce 82% of the country's meat, and that's where Eastern Europeans moved to find job opportunities in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And so you had in the stockyards a bunch of cattle, meat packers. It's actually fun fact where the bulls got their name, right? There was a
Oh, no
big
way.
bull that welcomed you into Back of the Yards. Like it was a gate, and then in the middle there was a bull, and that's part of the story, right? Of Chicago, it was the economic engine for the city, but it was also an immigrant population, not like a Mexican American population like it is now, but a Lithuanian, Bohemian, Irish. And so the Back of the Yards Neighborhood Council back in the 1940s and 50s was created unifying all these groups, using community organizing, and then they wrote a book about it later, about the philosophies and tools that people used in Back of the Yards to
I love
create
this.
unity
What
and to
what is
create
the name of
community.
that book for folks who
Well,
might want to?
it's a controversial book, but I think people
Uh-oh.
people should read all kinds of book, but this book was
Agreed.
called Rules for Radicals. And so I think it's important for us, especially as we're thinking about, folks banning books. I think people should read books that are controversial and books that may be a little different than what they're used to. But that was the book.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It's
eh,
important to have range, educated range, and
mhm,
understand where different philosophies come from, especially if you can use them towards you and your community's end game.
mhm.
So then talk to me, just kind of bringing it back to law.
So
Um,
law. Oh, so there's
yeah.
yeah. So in community organizing, the philosophy is that if you want to create change, you have to build power. And if you want to build community power, to build community power, there's three sources of community power. There are organized people, there's an organized message, and there's organized resources, right? And so for 10 years of my life before going to law school, right, from starting at 2014, 2015, I got a 3 minute beating to leave the gang, and I said, I'm not going to be a part of this anymore. And I said, I want to be part of changing my community, being part of the solution. And I spent my 10 years of my life organizing people, right? Organizing rallies, organizing job opportunities for young people, and I quickly realized. Um, so I ran for office in 2019 against Alderman Raymond Lopez, who was someone who I think is antithetical to what our community stands for. And I realized I didn't have any money, right? But I decided, hey, I want to do this because that's maybe the next step in building community change. And I was outraised heavily, like 11, like some insane number, like 11-1 or something like that. And I came within 277 votes of the runoff. And I remember that after that, um, I was dead broke. I had to move back to my mom's. Increase the piece was at our office was out of my mom's garage. I was doing Lyft and Uber, um, and I hit
And what's your
financial.
what's your age? Sorry, just for reference.
For reference, at this point, I'm like 24, 25.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
I know I ran for office pretty young, and part of there were opportunities to get my fundraising and to get money, but it was from sources that I was not aligned with, and I'm like, nah, that's not what I'm doing. That's not what I want to do. That's not what I got in this for. I'd rather, you know, in my mind, integrity is important, right? And what we
Yeah.
do matters. But that
Yep.
cost me my livelihood, right? And I would do it twice over, but it was a reality, right? That I became dead broke, had to move back to my parents. I was couch surfing, and it was a really rough time. And that's when I realized that I wanted to be more self sufficient, more self reliant, and that I wanted to become a better leader and a better advocate, and that I had learned how to organize people. I had an organized message, right? Everyone, I think, understood the power of what we could do together, but I didn't have the organized resources. And so I
Yeah.
went to law school with the idea that I want to be better at building community power through community, through building and organizing resources. And I think that's the role of the law, right? Like the role of the law can be used as a weapon, but also as a shield to help people organize resources, right? Organize their assets. It can, and law as liberation can look as simple as having a community member, a mom, protect their assets by doing a power of attorney, right? A trust, right? Um, I think there's something like I think there was a stat somewhere that talked about how Latinos generally generate about 2.7 trillion in consumption, right? Like we generate a lot of lot of money. I think the
Hmm.
number was 4.1 trillion of GDP, right? If we were our own
Yeah, that's our
country,
GDP today. Yeah.
GDP
Fourth or
today,
fifth biggest economy in the world.
fifth biggest economy, fastest growing, and that means protecting our resources, right? Protecting our assets. And so actually that's one of the things that we've done um, through the Hispanic Lawyers Association of Illinois. We've helped organize power of attorney workshops for families for emergency planning amidst all the chaos that is going on, to help people have a way to protect their assets, right?
Oh, that's big.
Yeah, and so those are some ways that the law kind of plays a role, helping organize resources, helping change policies, but also helping just people protect their assets and protect, this $4.1 trillion that we generate as a community.
Yeah. And I do see a shift, by the way, from especially from folks who can afford to think about this, like about spending money more intentionally, because I think a big sticking point
That
is our
part.
money our money tends to leave the community very often. We're big spenders in categories of entertainment, of cosmetics and beauty. And oftentimes these are going to big conglomerates. It's not historically, if you look at the last 10 years, I think there's a shift that's happening right now where we think about it's like almost like at least definitely a national conscience from a certain group of people that's coming up where it's like, where is our dollar going and how can we spend that more
Hmm.
intentionally, right? Like this boycott from Target, like it means something. The boycott on Starbucks, it means something that these boycotts are happening because it means that people are realizing that where you put your dollar is a vote. It's a vote
Mm-hmm.
for a company to do better and to continue doing it, what they're doing and how they're doing it. But I guess where I'm going with that is I like to give people also practical applications. When it comes to law, there have been, and unfortunately, businesses I've spoken with that have woken up to a lawsuit in their door, perhaps from led by a more right-leaning group that has taken one of the executive orders and then presented it to them, a combination, and saying, hey, like you are being sued, you are being brought to law. How do people deal with that? How do business owners deal with the legal dangers that have emerged under this administration?
Yeah, so two answers for that. Number one, I think part of it goes back to just the social capital that we hold as a community, right? And the network that we have. And so one of the things that we've done is, as the Hispanic Lawyers Association of Illinois, we started a rapid response network, right, of attorneys, because not all of us are experts on immigration law. Not all of us are experts on trust and estates or how to do a power of attorney. But with that said, we can unify our network and leverage the network of those who do. And so one of the practical, I think, piece of advice is to check out the Hispanic Lawyers Association of Illinois. And one of the things that we've developed is a referral list for labor and employment attorneys, right? That are Hispanic, that are from our community, that are bilingual, that understand maybe the nuances in our community. And also, in the same way, the second piece is like immigration attorneys, right? We developed an immigration attorney referral list to be able to, hey, I focus on intellectual property. Maybe I don't have the specific answer to that question, but we have the network that does, the social capital, right? I can connect you to my friend Enrique Espinosa, who's an immigration attorney. He can help you. Oh, you need labor and employment? Here's someone that I know. Here's a list. These are people from the Hispanic Lawyers Association of Illinois who might be able to help. And so I
Yeah.
think that's part of it too, right? Being understanding that we don't do this work alone, right? That there's a network of people, and sometimes, and maybe this goes back to the community organizing background. Social capital is a resource too, right? Like to have that many
Right.
attorneys
Yeah.
who are
In
knowledgeable
different
about
areas of
these things.
expertise. Yeah.
Exactly, right. And so that's one of the things that we've done, right? We've solidified, okay, who in our network is an expert in immigration law? Who in our network is an expert in labor and employment? And then thinking about that, the second piece was, okay, now that we've developed those referral lists that we can connect people to, what do people need from us that we can do? And so we partnered with Latinos Progresando, and we hosted a first of its kind power of attorney and short term guardianship workshop, right? Because families need help emergency planning. And we thought, hey, we could all get trained in how to help someone fill out their power of attorney to protect their assets in case of an emergency, and also help someone have a document for short term guardianship. And the reason why this is kind of it's really practical, and we're doing another one in the next couple of weeks. But the reason why this matters, it goes back to the conversation about protecting our resources, but also protecting our families in the case that something like this happens. And part of the reason why it's personal for me is in 2017. So I told you my dad left the picture when I was young. Um, he re-entered the picture once I graduated college, and I was, doing other things. Like, hey, we're back, and he had, he remarried, and have two sisters from that marriage that I'm really close with, and in 2017 they lived in Virginia, and I remember part of the reason that I started getting close to my dad again was because of my connection to my sisters. I thought, hey, my half sisters have nothing to do with the shenanigans that my dad did, back in the day. I want to have a relationship with my sisters. I want to be there for them. And in 2017, my dad calls me crying, saying, "Mijo, I don't know what to do. Um, your sisters were going to school, and their mom got picked up by ICE."
Mm.
And mind you, at this point, it's 2017. I'm 22, 23 years old. I don't know how to even locate where she's at. They don't know where she's at. Um, and I just remember feeling so powerless, just going back to, like, what I felt like I needed to do. I wanted to be there for my sisters. I wanted to protect them, provide for them, but I didn't even know how to locate their mom, right?
Yeah.
And my half sisters are crying. They come to Chicago, and now they live in Mexico because their mom was deported, and um, I have so I, my two younger sisters are in Mexico, and I have a little brother over there. But I just remember back in 2017, I wish I knew who to call. I wish I knew how my dad could access her bank account.
Yeah.
And all these things um, are part of also why it mattered so much to me that we did this power of attorney and short-term guardianship workshop, so that, in the one hand, we want to be on the offense and use
Prepare and
the law.
plan.
Yeah, but yeah, we want to prepare and plan, right, in case of an emergency, because I've been there, right? And if you don't,
Yeah.
it's what we say, like, we want to prepare for the best, or hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. And I've been in that situation at the worst. And I think attorneys, we have a responsibility and a duty to be public citizens and to help people use our legal tools for those kind of situations that we can help it. And so those are two ways, that we've been trying to use our network and our legal tools and leverage them to the benefit of our community.
Yeah.
Building a list of attorneys that can help guide people through immigration problems, through labor and employment issues, but also just setting up workshops to help families prepare in case of an emergency.
Yeah, yeah. No, I like that mantra. Plan for the best, prepare for the worst. Especially because I mean, as Mexican Americans, as Latinos, you and I have both seen the really sad and myriad of like just separations of families that are happening in real time right now. And so now more than ever, it's super important to plan for that for your immediate community, and then the same then might apply for your business. I want to talk to you a little bit also about transition of generational wealth and the different ways that that looks.
Mm.
In Increase the Peace, you built a leadership pipeline. You are like definitely founder through and through of Increase the Peace, but now is a whole new set of leaders that are carrying on the efforts of what you started there. Can you talk to me about how you think about generational wealth, not just in terms of dollars, but also in terms of leadership, visibility, and civic power?
Oof. Now that's a loaded question.
It is a loaded
uh,
question. Yeah.
so I think the pretty simple concept, I think, for increase the peace and just life in general is to leave places better than you found them, right? And that real leaders create other leaders, and that if you get into spaces, it's your responsibility to be that person that you may have needed when you were growing up, but also that person that can help keep the doors open to wherever you got. And so at Increase the Peace, I knew that building an organization and building an institution, and this goes back to our community organizing principles, right? The idea in community organizing is that people are powerful, right? But that we need organizations to, one, make it's not just about the individual, right? It's about the collective. But also, number two, that if we want to be successful, and if we want to be successful at creating social change, we need organizations that will outlast us, right? Because otherwise, the work is not sustainable. And so, when founding Increase the Peace, from day one, I knew that, hey, I'm leading this thing now, but I want to actively create other leaders so that one of these leaders can take this over. Have a
And how
succession
do you
plan
do
from day
that?
one.
How do you create leaders 101 for folks that may
Yeah.
not know?
So I think part of it is training, right? Community organizing training, helping get people a shared language of how do we believe and social change. And I think the community organizing training helps people do that. It's a week-long training where people go through community organizing principles and leadership and how to be a community leader, right? And that gives people a shared language. But then I think it's also just about then connecting people to opportunities to leverage, their expertise and to grow. And so part of our what we do is we train young people in community organizing, and then we give them paid jobs, right, to lead efforts, and then we give them a budget through partnerships that we have of like, hey, you've learned community organizing, and mind you, some of our youth start with us since high school, right? So we have a pipeline of from high school to now we have young people out of those 700 young people that we've trained. The pipeline is from high school to like 35 years old, and some of those young people that were part of our programs or part of our organization are now in city council, right? Alderwoman
Yeah.
Julia Ramirez, she was uh,
Wow.
our Brighton Park Increase the Peace leader, right? And the idea is give young people, one, the training, two, the opportunity through a paid job, through resources to create a budget so they can implement their own solution to whatever issue they face with other young people and put those community organizing skills to practice, right? And learn how how to work with other people because that's a skill.
Yeah.
Um, and then actively connecting them to this larger network and the social capital that we may have available. Oh, you're really interested in politics or you're really interested in business. Hey, here's these two, three other people in the neighborhood or in Little Village or somewhere else that could help mentor you, that could help given that your interests align. And then it's also really about passing the mic, right? I think that's sometimes I think as leaders, folks just suffocate opportunities, right? And they see success as a zero sum game, and they think that, oh, if someone has more, then I have less. And people need to like reframe and think that no, success is not zero sum, and that you can,
This one is
no,
big. This one
yeah,
is big. It's interesting. I feel like going into Latino spaces, there's been different rooms that I've been in. There's been rooms where it's just like, hey, we grow the pie if we all
hmm
put in, and then generate more opportunity. And then there's definitely what people call the crabs in a bucket mentality. And so, um, I get the feeling that we really need to lean into generating more opportunities for ourselves,
hmm
especially in this space where scarcity is what is being inflicted on our community by people being taken off of the streets, people from our community being taken off the streets without due process, people being sued, right?
hmm
Fear being instilled in our communities. So how, in this time, like, what are recommendations like that you might have for folks to continue to build in that community mindset to generate with the effort to generate more opportunities and generate more wealth? Like any recommendations, whether it's literature or just like step one, here's what we got to do.
I think step one that we got to do is just we got to, I think, lean into our cultural strengths, right? And what makes us um, just special as a community, right? We're communal in nature, like carne asadas. That's what we do.
Yep.
That's who we are. We help our neighbors, and I think we need to create generational wealth by leaning into our being more intentional about creating that social capital for ourselves, having one-on-ones with people, having coffees with people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Expanding your universe of people that you can connect with. That's number one. Number two, I also think it's imperative that we take on mentorship seriously, right? And think about, okay, I'm in this space. Who am I bringing into this space? Um, like part of why, I'm at a large global law firm, and for me, I don't measure success by being at this global law firm. I measure it by how many people have I helped get to a similar position? How many people have I helped get into this firm or get into like this building? And so one of the things that I think is pretty cool, like if you see behind there, I got the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute
Yeah.
signage from when we hosted the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute here, right? And there was a bunch of young people who had never seen a global law firm, and we got them in here. And then over
Yeah.
here on the side, right here, there's a signage from the Hispanic Lawyers Association of Illinois, right? We also brought them into our law firm and we hosted them here. And so
That's awesome.
part, and part of it, like that's the way we should measure success. Like how many, people, how we build community, but also how we open up doors of where we're currently at and bring others along for the journey with us.
Yeah, Berto. I mean, I gotta interject here and just say, like, that is incredibly insightful how you view that. I do think we hold such a big responsibility in the positions we're in, right? Like, for me, and I seldom talk about it on the podcast, but it's directly relevant to what you just said. Working as a marketing manager at Google, one of my first questions being there was like, hey, so how are we interacting with the communities that we impact, that we disrupt, right? And it's just like, I do think we hold a responsibility to bring people into those positions, to refer people with talent, to raise that talent as well, and say, hey, like, you're interested in politics, why don't you try the CLCF Academy? You're interested in this, why don't you check out this grant? Because if I had that opportunity, and I know how much it changed my life, I think about what it could do for someone else and the kind of leader and the kind of power that we could bring into our community, right? So I think it is important that people catch on to that responsibility that we do hold if we buy, and hopefully that we do, because it's very crucial for our perpetual, not just existence, but persistence and thriving in this economy. So, like, I hear you. I was at the CHCI event that you hosted at KNL Gates. I thought it was very impressive to see people from not just my college but my high school that were there, and how smart they were. Like, I know that people when we were young used to say, like, oh, how smart these kids are. I'm really like, now I'm that person.
No, we have talent.
Yeah, we have so much talent in our community. Like, it's like, yes, take up time, take up space to, like, indulge yourself. And I think that that's super important. I think sometimes we put ourselves in the back burner in community too, in the name of community. My personal point of view is that, like, help yourself, absolutely. But that is not void of helping other people, because those other people did that for you. That's why you're in the position now. In a community where we don't tend to see as much generational wealth, in a community where mom and dad or uncle and auntie weren't necessarily the people that, and no shade, no problem if that's the case. Leverage that to grow the pie, right? So I'm really about everything that you're saying here, and I definitely agree with it. Add on the fact that you actually cultivated leaders all the way from high school, which I think is super impressive. So today you've made this transition from, like, let me just, a recapitulation of everything that I've heard around your career, from working at a grocery store, making maybe $50 a week, making increase the peace opportunities for other people, working in offices, being placed through MICFA, and now being at KNL Gates. I'm curious as to how you personally think about building wealth for yourself and your family, like the people that come after you. Like, how do you think about the actual, we talked a little bit about cultural capital, community capital. How do you think about the moolah and in the capitalist system that the U.S. is?
Yeah, so how I think about the moolah. So here's my Young Money perspective. To take, I don't know if folks remember Young Money from Lil Wayne days, but that was a, yeah, I know. That was a Young Money reference to Lil Wayne. But I think part of like the struggle and, like, full transparency here is that a lot of us are the first. A lot of us are the first to graduate college. A lot of us are the first to graduate law school. A lot of us are the first in a lot of things, and so I'm still figuring out the Young Money piece, right? How do I deal with this, but also how do I create wealth for myself, but also for my family? Because, as I told you, my grandma worked at McDonald's. I'm her retirement plan, right? My mom is a hairdresser. I'm her retirement plan, right? And so I'm not just building for myself, but I'm building for my family. And then also, I sit on the boards of a lot of organizations, including Casa Central, and others that I want to support. And so, how do I build for myself so that I can do good for my family, but also good for my community? And the reality is that it kind of starts very simply for me. It's just paying off debts, paying off debts first, right? Like, when I get my check, the first thing I do is look at all my debts. Boom, boom. Here you go. especially because I think, and I'm going to share this for the full sake of transparency, is that even though I got a full ride to Northwestern Law School, I I had to, I have debt from undergrad because I was, a gang member who just happened to have a good ACT score to get into undergrad, but I had horrible grades, and so I'm still carrying that debt from undergrad. And so even though I may have gotten a full ride to law school, which is in itself a blessing, I still gotta, pay off my debts from undergrad, and pay off my debts from when I was so broke that I didn't have any money, right? When I was doing Lyft and being and doing Lyft and rideshare. And so even though I am extremely blessed to be at a global law firm where I'm able to, give my grandma a nice birthday gift, right? I'm also just being conscious of living frugally and paying off my debts first, and paying off my debts and then avoiding debt, and then anything extra, investing it. But first and foremost, just paying off the debts that I have. And I think that's part of just the truthfulness of how I'm building
Yeah.
that
Yeah, no, and
generational wealth.
I appreciate that transparency. That transparency is so important, right? We often see like the outside and the flashy global law for firm built all the things. Like we tend to paint everything with like a broad stroke brush, and that's definitely not it. I mean,
Yeah.
debt is a big part of how sometimes success in this country, because so much
Hmm.
of it is driven by the physical moolah or assets
Hmm.
otherwise. It is risk equals cost, right? And
Yep.
so you took some big risks. Were you in the financial position to cushion those big risks? Not necessarily. It sounds
Yeah.
like, but listen, but look at you where you are, right? Like
Yeah.
you said I'm going to take these calculated risks, and they paid off. And so right now, like I think you're a great story to feature. You're a great narrative to feature here, because this isn't the time to play shy, to play it
Hmm.
safe. Like not it isn't safe right
Hmm.
now. And so to hear from people like you that are taking calculated risks, I think is super important, and hopefully can encourages other people to think the same way.
Yeah,
Um,
and to that piece, actually, just thinking about, if folks who are interested in going to law school or interested in
yeah.
going to medical school, right? Like a lot of my friends who are at a big global law firm, right? A lot of us just talk like part of the, I guess, the social capital and just the knowledge creation here is that, hey, we're at all these cool firms. A lot of us are just paying off debt, like a lot of us are paying off the debts that we incurred to get to the positions that we're at. And that's part of the reality too. And I think that's important for folks to kind
Yeah.
of grapple with and recognize, and a data point for their calculated risk making. Does that make sense? Like
Yeah.
it
Yeah, absolutely. Like, hey,
yeah.
we're paying off debt. And like what's interesting is when you talk to business people, you realize that not all debt is bad, right?
Yeah.
Like in the easiest way, debt that is not bad helps your business grow. Like some people
Hmm.
buy debt literally to help themselves grow. Another is education, right?
Hmm.
Education is going to expand your opportunity, expand the rooms that you're going to be in. It's going to set you up for generational wealth, right? Like, I think there's a lot of questions around education right now because of what's being prioritized nationally, globally. However, at the end of the day, once you have that education, you have that network, you have a group of people who are very, very connected, who are connected
Hmm.
to generational wealth, who have an education to know how you use law, like you mentioned,
Yeah.
to understand how the system works. And that's super powerful,
Yeah.
right?
And
So,
here's another thing, because now you're getting me going.
yeah,
Yeah. Like I'm like,
please go for it.
yeah. So I think part of that too is, growing up, I don't know if your parents told you something along the lines of, you know, tu educación nadie te la va a quitar, right? Tu
Claro. Yeah.
educación nadie te la va a
Same.
quitar. And you grow up, and I remember after I ran for office the first time, there were opportunities like where people that didn't support me the first time wanted me to run for another position again. And I would actually have been an elected official. And I remember being in my mom's, salon and asking, and, she was like my therapist basically. And I was asking her, Mom, do you think I should do this or should I go to law school? And she's like, no, mijo, ve a la escuela de leyes para que no estés como todos estos políticos donde ellos dependen en esa posición. Ten tu carrera. she was basically saying like, don't be like these politicians, and this is no this to anyone. This is my mom said it, right? So nobody take offense. It's not about anyone.
It's okay.
Uh,
Third person.
third
We're just
person,
quoting.
right? But she said like, don't let politics be your hustle. Like politics should be something that you do as service, right? And you should have your own
Yeah.
career. You should have your own career, your own way to make money, and have politics be something, politics or community service be something that you do as service. And my mom, mind you, she's a hairdresser. She came to this country when she was 16 years old, but I think that was powerful, right? Like she understood kind of what you were saying about the power of having a career, having a way that a career that can be sustainable, that a career that can facilitate all my other interests, that can facilitate leveraging and creating wealth not only for myself but for my community. Um,
Hmm.
and so I think that's also part of that education piece, right? That you know that credential, that pedigree, um, will help you in ways that are not measurable just by monetary value alone.
And it comes back to the whole theme of the season. It's just like wealth has always meant more than one thing, but I think now more than ever, when we're seeing the seams of everything, I think 2020 was a big turning point for the country, where we saw, you know, hey, what the heck? Frontline workers support our economy, and yet they're not being paid. We're seeing kind of
Hmm.
like the seams of society come apart and come open perpetually over and over again. And I'm hoping that it's leading people to ask questions that we shouldn't be scared of. These are
Yeah.
important questions, right? Like, how do these systems work? How can I get closer to how these systems work? How can I build my wealth in ways more than one? I think it's been an awakening for me too. It's not things that I didn't know before, but it's the difference between reading it in academia and then experiencing it in the real world and saying, like,
Mm.
okay, well, how do I want to align my life? How do I want to shift my life to ensure that I am continually like embodying wealth building in a true and real way that's going to survive me, survive my family?
Hmm.
So, yeah, no, I love this conversation. And I also want to ask you about responding in a time of crisis, because right now, some might say, is a time of urgency. And it was also a time of urgency a couple years ago when you co founded the Black and Brown Unity Parade.
Hmm.
Polarization in this country is no doubt intensifying, right? Like currently, as of this week, we're recording this in late August. Um, the president of this country has said he might send National Guard to Chicago. And so there's a right now a tit for tat and words happening between Chicago governor, mayor, and the president indirectly. So polarization is increasing at that level, but also among citizens. So, like, how do you think about building solidarity in times of deep polarization to then, execute our power and show our power?
Yeah. So I think there's when we started the Black and Brown Unity Car Parade, um, the idea was it was right during the George Floyd uprisings, right? And there was a lot of tension between Black and Brown communities during the uprisings, right? There were, if folks don't remember, like, there were Black and Brown folks fighting each other in Little Village and other places in the city. And we thought, hey, this isn't it. We need to do something to change the narrative, right? And we need to. And so I got together with Black organizers from South Shore, and I said, hey, man, like, we got to do something about this. And it was one of those things too where I think sometimes you try to look around and say, who is gonna stand up? And then you got to realize, wait, those people are us. We got to stand up. We got to change the
Yeah.
narrative. It's up
Yep.
to us, right? And so I remember I called Will Calloway, Black organizer in South Shore. It's my brother. Um, and I said, man, it can't go down like this. We need to unite our communities. And was all going down back in, was it 2020, I think, 2021? 2020. And all these things were happened on a Sunday. We got together on a Monday to figure out how do we go from here? Where do we go from here? and I said, you know what? Let's do a Black and Brown Unity Car Parade. We'll start at Marquette Park. There's a memorial there on 67th and Kedzie that is a memorial memorializing Martin Luther King walking down Marquette Park and being hit in the head with a rock by neo Nazis, right? And we decided, you know what? That's a Black and Brown community. That's a park that holds a lot of significance. Let's tell everybody, and mind you, this is around 2020, so marches aren't really encouraged. Instead, we're asking folks to come in their cars, to bring, American flags, Mexican flags, Pan-African flags, as a show of solidarity. And it was funny because we were both getting pushback from our respective communities. Oh, why are we doing this? We shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
And right? And our response was like, hey, we have the same struggles when it comes to housing, when it comes to violence. Like, there's a lot more that unites us than that separates us. It's messed up right now. There's a lot of tension, but we got to have each other's backs. Like, we like, there's so many issues that we face together, right? And also, we want to be the allies that we want for ourselves, right? We have to model what allyship looks like. We have to be the neighbors that we didn't have. We need to be the allies that we want to have. Part of the learning there is that first you got to start with truth, right? And have open conversations and be like, yo, this is messed up, this is messed up. And then have some healing through those tough conversations, right? Have some
Yeah.
healing. But then you got to have that healing lead to action. You got to have that healing
Right.
lead to some concrete way that we're going to support each other.
Right. So
And I
that was going
think
to be my follow-up. So what happened? What came of the Unity Parade, and what palpable things were able to shake out?
So I think part of it was just open dialogue and open lines of communication, right? These were organizers and communities that had always organized their own things, but had never been in community with each other. And so part of it was just like bringing people together, and then the partnerships that were created afterwards, right? Once people, and it's funny because we would have, again, leaning into, what makes us strong and our cultural strengths, right? Having, people will say, oh, you're not invited to the barbecue, or you're not invited to the carne asada, right? At the Black and Brown Unity Car Parade, it's a barbecue slash carne asada with paleteros, eloteros. People are vibing,
Love it.
good music, and those conversations where people get to bond over having an elote, and now they know, oh, you're from South Shore, I'm from Little Village, and the fact that people are in community, that creates all sorts of, it plants the seeds of all these partnerships that happen afterwards, of people organizing their own things, being able to rely on each other, and being able to organize things set and apart from the Black and Brown Unity Car Parade that we didn't anticipate, but that were created because people just had a place to build community and talk to each other.
Yeah, and you guys were able to, it sounds like, start from a similar truth, that like the shared truth being like, we both face the same issues and we can't keep going this way of
Yeah, that
being against
and
each
just
other.
yeah, and just acknowledging like, yo, there's a lot of anti-black sentiment that exists in the Latino community,
Oh
right?
yeah. Yeah.
There's colorism, and there's a lot of like anti-Latino, anti-immigrant sentiment that exists in the African American community. Those are truths, right? And
Both.
like, let's talk about them. Like, it's important to acknowledge those hard truths, because if we try to like beat around the bush and not acknowledge those things, then we're never gonna move to that healing piece, right? But it's like
Right.
acknowledging the realities. Yo, that's messed up. That's messed up. We don't want it to go down this way, and then just having a realization that, hey, after you acknowledge some hard truths, we're not that different, you
Yeah.
know?
I'm going to ask you a hard question, or maybe it might not be hard once you hear it. But it's been something that's been sitting with me, given that the Latino bloc, when we think about the Latino bloc politically in the US, has increasingly become more fragmented, right? Like the numbers show that there is a steady narrowing Democrat margin within the Latino bloc within the last presidential race compared to the 2016 election. And then that in the last election, we saw Latino men in particular show a very dramatic shift. Research analysis showed Trump winning with Latino men by 10 percentage points. a massive swing from 2020 when Joe Biden won this group by 23 points last. So, and this is just one of the stats that I'm citing, but there's a lot of ways that we're seeing Latinos become fragmented, and I've been thinking lately a lot about the kind of like a silent truth, which is that Latinos in the U.S. were comprised of so many different groups with so many different countries and backgrounds, right? Like, no, we're not all first gen or direct, like, right, immigrants, but we have a deep connection to different politics and different ways that we view the world. Layer on classism, layer on colorism, layer on all of these isms. Latinos starts to become a little bit more of like it was a hypothesis to bring us all together, and that's how we stand, like completely true in power in a time where like there seems to be more fragmentation and division. Like, again, I said, like in my head it starts becoming a little bit of a harder question that it's like we need to work on this, but maybe it's not so hard to you. Like, how do we bring Latino unity back? Like Black and brown unity is so important. Black and Latino unity is so important, specifically. But like even among us, like bringing value aligned people in the Latino bloc with us and kind of bringing us back together, right? Because I think what I found interesting is like, again, one thing to read it on paper, another thing to meet people that, for example, in Chicago, were frustrated by Venezuelan immigrants that we had getting opportunities here in the city. When they weren't able to get the same opportunities when they had immigrated here. And there starts to be like a pitting against each other, kind of like a culmination of all these topics we've talked about, right? Like the scarcity mindset, the like resourcing and choosing individualism over the collective. I guess the question is like, yeah, how do we move forward from here?
Yeah, and I guess it goes back to the lessons that I talked about earlier with the Black and Brown Unity Car Parade, right? Because one of the parades was actually, even though we've had it annually, there was one year where it almost fell apart because African American folks that are part of our coalition were upset about the migrant crisis, and especially because around the time that a Black and Brown Unity Car Parade was going to take place, there were reports they were going to use a closed down public school in an African American community that was designed to become a community center for youth to house folks that were coming in during the migrant crisis. And that created a lot of tension, right? And I remember we're having a conversation at an organizing table. And again, it's a recognition of hard truths and saying, hey, man, like, actually, Mexican Americans in Chicago, we feel you. And I remember African American organizers were like, what do you mean you feel us? I'm like, no, Mexican Americans have been here for 30 years, haven't gotten a work permit, and there's folks that are coming in and having a work permit in a month or two, right? And they're like, wait, what? And just having that hard truth. And then, but moving on from there, recognizing those hard truths and being like, yeah, but who do we want to be? Like, what are we about? We want to be the neighbor that we didn't have. We don't want to say, why are they having those things? We want to say, why are we not having those things? Why are folks not having work permits? Why are we not having help with housing, right? And so then we turn that, like, with those hard truths into then a shared call and a shared action of, like, instead of saying, why do they have this? Why do they have that? And pitting ourselves against each other. Hey, instead, let's make the Black and Brown Unity Car Parade about housing for all, right? That we should all have access to affordable housing, not just, folks that come here, during a crisis or folks that live in great neighborhoods. We should all have access to affordable housing, right? And I think maybe there's the lesson there, right? That we can't just gloss over these hard truths, but then because we don't talk about them, folks just assume that we're all on the same page just because we're Latino or just because, we're African American. We got to understand that there's nuances to where we live. And I think that's part of the reason why Democrats lost the advantage in the last elections. They went from a 38-point lead in the Latino community to a 3-point lead in the last election. And part of that is because, one, treating all Latinos as if we're all the same, right? And just acknowledging that, hey, a Mexican American in the south side of Chicago might be very different, might have different interests than a Mexican from New Mexico, a Mexican American
Right.
from New Mexico, right? And or from a Puerto Rican in the Bronx. And we have similarities, and I think those are important to acknowledge. But there's also nuances. But because, and I think part of it is we have to be the ones that demand that the messengers and that the media infrastructure that is being used to target our community is made by us because we know our communities, right? And we know our lived experiences. And if we don't have credible messengers from these communities and we treat them all like we're a monolith and we're all the same, then that's where the message is lost. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And I think we are entering like a new era where like I think we're very clear. Even in our communities, more clear than ever because I don't know that we always were that we're not a monolith. Like I
Yeah.
think Latinos were like, oh yeah, we're not a monolith, but like here's what that actually means when it comes to
Means,
power.
yeah.
Right. And so the way that I'm thinking is just like, okay, well let's talk about value alignment. Like the conversation that you had with your organizing friends on the other side of the table, saying like, hey, we have these set of problems and typically they've been pitted against each other structurally. Here's why not. So just value alignment becomes much more important and not just bringing Latinos along with us, but anyone that believes in those
Mm-hmm.
things like housing access for all or job opportunities for all, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
and we believe in this shared history. We agree in this that this is the history that led to where we are today. So that becomes
Yeah.
so much more important.
And here's one thing that you triggered the thought right now of how when we're pitted against each other, it's going back to what you said earlier about being or succumbing to the belief in the scarcity mindset instead of the abundance mindset, right? Right now, they're giving out bonuses to join all these, federal law enforcement organizations.
Yep.
And there's money for different things, but we should also be saying, hey, look, there's money for different things. We should be advocating so that folks have affordable housing, so that folks have support in their educational journey. Like those things are there, but because we
Right.
succumb to the belief that you know things are scarce and that we don't have, then we start pitting against each other instead of asking, hey, we should have access to the fundamentals. We should have access to, housing that doesn't cost you a third or a half of your paycheck. We should have access to going to law school or medical school without being 200 grand, 300 grand in debt. And those, but I think part of it is that our failure to achieve those things is one, succumbing to the scarcity mindset and instead of thinking about how can we advocate for the things that we want, advocating for the things that we want instead of being pitted against each other. And two, recognizing the diversity of the Latino community, recognizing that because we're all different, right? We share similarities. It means being more targeted and having trusted and local messengers to talk about these things with authenticity, right? Have
Yeah.
acknowledging these hard truths and being able to meet people where they're at. When I go in back of the yards and I'm having an elote and I'm chilling, like I'm talking very differently than when I'm, in a law firm mindset. Like we do that, we code switch, right? And part of that,
Mm-hmm.
kind of maybe if we do that ourselves when we're at the carne asada and we're at our nice corporate gigs, if we can do that and if we can acknowledge the context and the way to speak in different contexts, then I think we have to be able to bring that large scale so that we can talk
We
to our
can
community.
bridge. That's what happens. Like I think it's a for me personally, it's like I acknowledge that we code switch and that it's a superpower and it's about evolving beyond the code switch to then bridge, right? Because you have context
Mm-hmm.
to so many rooms. And
Mm-hmm.
quite frankly, I don't want to spend my whole life code switching. Like I
Mm-hmm.
want to get to a point where I'm Leanne in every single room and I can bridge all those spaces. I think code switching is a condition of, and now I'm going off on my own soapbox, but I think code switching is a condition of the environments that we're in, right?
Yeah.
Like ideally, Berto, you're able to show up as Berto here, Berto there, Berto everywhere, of course to different scopes of what that means, different levels of access, but like you are who you are, and you're able, because of that, you're able to bridge and build. And I assume that you are. I assume that the code switching is more of just like addressing your audience for communication. But it's like, for me personally, like who had to code switch since I was a kid, I'm just like, that is my goal, to be more of myself, so that I can more effectively bridge these different, wildly different worlds that I transit that should exist in the same timeline,
Yeah, no,
basically.
well, look, we're complex humans, and I think that it goes back to that authenticity, right? Like, we're
Right.
complex humans, and we need to be able to embrace ourselves fully while understanding that maybe code switching might be too narrow of a term, but that different contexts call for different things, but it doesn't mean that you have to give up. It means that you may have to give up less than you think you need to. Like right now, as we're
Yeah.
speaking, like if you look at my office, I'm decked out. Like I'm decked out
Yeah,
in
I respect it. I like all the
You know, I'm
photos.
I'm decked out in my White Sox gear. I have like my community here that's increased the peace. Um,
I love it.
I have my café de olla from La Catedral, supporting a small local business.
So good. Yeah.
Every month or so, I bring café de olla to everybody here in the office so they can know what café de olla is like, right? Being that bridge. And so, but I think part of it is if we're able to understand the different contexts and the way we're able to bridge build, we got to do that bridge building not only from um, where we come from and where we're at, but also where we're going,
Yeah.
right? And help
Yeah.
people help meet people where they're at and understand that hey, they might not
They might not
be.
be where you're at already. Yeah, yeah. I think sometimes our communities, like, it's not my job to educate, and to be honest, it's not. But when you look at the, like you said, the road to where you're trying to build to, sometimes you got to fill in that gap. Like right now,
Yeah.
I'm thinking about like Moneda Moves and these narratives. How is that beneficial to the world? How is that
Mhm.
beneficial to folks in Europe who may not be as versed in our community? Because that is important. Like, we are a global community, and that is a part of building power, building wealth, building connections, all of these things that we've been talking about. So I'm right there with you. Now, Berto, we have had a fantastic conversation. So many bite-sized pieces that we're definitely going to be promoting out there. So many gems. I want to end with the question here that I ask all folks that come on the podcast, which is, talk to me about what is your biggest money learning that you've learned,
Ooh.
at trancazo or out of success, like either like a failure or a big success that you had.
All right. So I think biggest money learning, um, that money and doing well for yourself, again, should be about how many doors you open for other people. And how, when we talk about money and we talk about wealth, we should think about that as a pathway for the freedom to do more for others, right? And to leave places better than you found them, and to keep the doors open of the places that you entered, and to be that person that you might have needed when you were younger and were trying to get to the spot you're at now. And so that's been my biggest money learning, that if you're not doing that with the financial resources that you have, then you're doing it wrong.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Berto. I really appreciate your time, your energy, and excited to share this episode of Moneda Moves with the world. Thank you, mi gente, for joining us this week on Moneda Moves. Before you go, please make sure to hit follow on this podcast so you can receive new episodes right when they are released. You can follow right now in the app you're using to listen to this podcast. Also, continue keeping cuentas and keeping tabs on our Latinx community and Money Moves via our free newsletter written by yours truly at monedamoves.substack.com. That's monedamoves.substack.com. I'll see you there. Hasta la próxima.